Among the old families of England, marriages were seldom born from affection. They were arranged beneath painted ceilings, discussed over polished oak tables, and measured in acres, alliances, and family names rather than in matters of the heart. Yet history had a quiet way of mocking such careful calculations. More than one great house had been transformed, not by the daughter whose beauty dazzled an entire ballroom, but by the woman no one had thought worthy of introducing. The first chill winds of October swept across Ashcombe Manor, carrying with them the scent of damp earth and fallen leaves. Morning mist clung stubbornly to the rolling hills surrounding the estate, softening ancient stone walls and swallowing the distant woods in pale silver. The great house, though elegant from afar, bore the invisible wounds of years spent struggling against declining fortunes. Ivy climbed weathered towers, roof slates had begun to loosen, and several windows in the east wing remained shuttered to hide rooms no longer fit for guests. Inside, however, every servant moved with unusual urgency. Fresh flowers were arranged in crystal vases. Silver was polished until it reflected candlelight like still water. Persian carpets were brushed. Portraits of long-dead ancestors stared proudly down upon preparations that felt less like welcoming a visitor and more like preparing for judgment. Because by noon, the Earl of Blackthorn would arrive. Lord Edwin Harcourt stood at the tall library window, watching two gardeners rake leaves already scattered again by the wind. His aging face carried the strain of sleepless nights, and every passing minute tightened the lines around his mouth. "The carriage should have crossed the Eastern Bridge by now," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. No one answered. Everyone understood what today's visit meant. The Earl was one of the wealthiest noblemen in the kingdom, young enough to marry, powerful enough to rescue a failing estate, and important enough that every neighbouring family secretly hoped to secure his favour. For Lord Harcourt, however, hope had become necessity. Mounting debts had swallowed nearly every profitable acre of Ashcombe. Tenants whispered that another harsh winter might force families from their cottages. Tradesmen had begun requesting payment before deliveries. Even loyal servants quietly feared that wages might soon stop altogether. One fortunate marriage could silence every creditor knocking upon the manor's heavy oak doors. One decision could save generations of family history. For carefully chosen ladies had already arrived at Ashcombe Manor, each invited under the polite pretense of an autumn gathering. Every gown had been selected with care. Every smile had been practiced before mirrors. Every conversation had been rehearsed long before the Earl's carriage appeared on the road. Each believed she understood precisely how to win a nobleman's admiration. None noticed the small movement near the orchard beyond the formal gardens. There, beneath the branches of an ancient oak trembling in the autumn breeze, someone had knelt quietly in the damp grass. A tiny sparrow, one fragile wing bent awkwardly against its body, fluttered helplessly between trembling hands. And as the distant sound of carriage wheels finally echoed through the mist, the young woman never looked toward the arriving Earl. She was far too concerned with saving a creature everyone else would have walked past. The young woman cradling the injured sparrow was named Clara Ashford, though within Ashcombe Manor her name was spoken far less often than those of the four ladies preparing to greet the Earl. She was 23 years of age, neither celebrated for remarkable beauty nor remembered for dazzling conversation. If anyone had been asked to describe Clara, they would likely have paused before answering. She possessed chestnut hair that refused to remain perfectly arranged, thoughtful grey eyes that lingered on details others overlooked, and a quiet grace that disappeared entirely whenever attention turned toward her. It suited most people to forget she was there. Clara was the orphan daughter of Lord Harcourt's late sister. After fever claimed both her parents when she was 12, Ashcombe Manor had become her home. Lord Harcourt had honoured his promise to provide for her, but promises made from duty rarely resembled those made from affection. She had been given a comfortable room beneath the eastern staircase, enough dresses to appear respectable, enough education to manage correspondence, enough kindness to avoid scandal, but never enough importance to belong. To visiting guests, Clara was usually introduced as a distant relation assisting with household affairs. Few asked further questions. She never complained. Instead, she learned the quiet rhythm of the estate. She knew which maid secretly sent part of her wages to an aging mother. She knew the gardener's aching knee predicted rain better than any almanac. She remembered every servant's birthday, every tenant's child, every old widow who needed firewood before winter arrived. These things seemed insignificant to those living above the servants' hall. To Clara, they were the true heartbeat of Ashcombe. The sparrow shivered in her palms. Its tiny chest rose and fell rapidly. One delicate wing drooped unnaturally, likely injured after striking one of the manor stone walls during the previous night's storm. "There now," Clara whispered softly. "You've survived worse than fright." Her fingers were astonishingly gentle as she wrapped the bird inside a folded linen handkerchief. Mrs. Dalton, the elderly housekeeper, appeared at the edge of the orchard carrying visible concern upon her lined face. "There you are, Miss Clara. You'll ruin your hem kneeling in wet grass." Clara smiled without looking up. "I believe it has a broken wing." Mrs. Dalton sighed. "Most would leave nature to itself. Most aren't holding him." The older woman could not help smiling. "You always did have room in your heart for things nobody else noticed." Clara finally rose, brushing damp leaves from her skirt. "I shall keep him warm in the conservatory until Mr. Wilkes returns." The gamekeeper. "He mended a hawk once." Mrs. Dalton shook her head affectionately. "Only you would ask a gamekeeper to save a sparrow." Before Clara could answer, the deep sound of carriage wheels rolled across the gravel drive. Another followed. Then another. The Earl had arrived. From the front gardens came excited voices, hurried footsteps, and the rustle of expensive silk gowns. One maid hurried across the lawn. "Miss Clara." "His lordship asks that everyone gather in the drawing room immediately." Clara glanced down at the tiny bird nestled safely within the linen cloth. "I cannot leave him in the cold." "The ladies are already assembled. They will not notice my absence." The maid hesitated. "They may not. But someone else might." Clara looked toward the grand entrance where 6 magnificent horses stood before an elegant black carriage bearing the silver crest of Blackthorn. A tall gentleman stepped onto the gravel. Even from across the gardens, there was something strikingly different about him. He ignored the servants rushing to greet him, ignored the elaborate welcome waiting inside. Instead, his gaze drifted across the gardens and came to rest upon the lone young woman standing beneath the old oak tree, gently sheltering an injured sparrow against the autumn wind. For a brief, silent moment, neither of them looked away. The Earl of Blackthorn had not intended to look toward the orchard. His journey had been long, the road soaked by relentless autumn rain, and every mile had reminded him why he preferred the solitude of his northern estates to the endless rituals expected of a nobleman. He had already endured 3 carefully arranged introductions that season, each more exhausting than the last. Smiles rehearsed before mirrors, conversations polished like silver, ambitions hidden behind graceful curtsies. He had grown weary of all of it. Yet something, perhaps no more than a flicker of movement beneath the ancient oak, drew his attention away from the grand entrance. He saw neither an elegant gown nor an ambitious smile. He saw a young woman shielding a tiny bird from the cold as though the entire estate had disappeared around her. She had not even noticed his arrival. For reasons he could not explain, the image lingered in his thoughts. "Your lordship." The voice belonged to Lord Edwin Harcourt, who hurried down the stone steps with a smile stretched slightly too wide. Though his coat was finely tailored, the frayed cuffs betrayed years of careful repairs. Behind his practiced welcome lay unmistakable anxiety. "Welcome to Ashcombe Manor. We are deeply honoured." The Earl inclined his head politely. "It is a beautiful estate." "It has been in our family for nearly 2 centuries, Lord Harcourt replied with pride that barely concealed exhaustion. "Please, everyone is waiting inside." As they crossed the entrance hall, servants quietly removed the Earl's travelling coat. Rainwater dripped onto polished marble, and the warmth of several fireplaces slowly replaced the chill of the morning air. The drawing room doors opened. For ladies rose almost in perfect unison. Silk rustled. Fans folded gracefully. Each curtsy had clearly been practiced countless times. Lady Beatrice Ashcombe, renowned for her striking beauty, offered the first greeting. Her sapphire gown caught every ray of afternoon light. "Your lordship, we feared the roads might delay your journey." "They nearly did," he answered simply. Lady Eleanor Fairchild stepped forward next. She possessed remarkable confidence and spoke with effortless charm. "We have prepared music after luncheon. I do hope you enjoy Mozart." "If the company enjoys it," the Earl replied. Miss Victoria Pembroke smiled brightly. "We've also arranged a walk through the rose gardens should the weather improve." His answer remained courteous. "If the weather allows." Each lady spoke in turn. Each seemed determined to display some accomplishment. The Earl answered every question with impeccable manners, yet his attention wandered despite himself. Something was missing. Or rather, someone. He glanced almost absent-mindedly toward the windows overlooking the gardens. The orchard beyond stood quiet now. The young woman had vanished. Lord Harcourt noticed the movement immediately. "Is something amiss, your lordship?" "You mentioned 4 ladies." "I did. I believe I counted only 4. Lord Harcourt blinked, uncertain why the observation unsettled him. "Indeed. Those are the ladies." The Earl remained silent for a moment before asking calmly, "And the young woman in the orchard?" The room grew unexpectedly still. Lady Beatrice's smile stiffened. Lady Eleanor lowered her teacup. Even the servants paused. Lord Harcourt forced a small laugh. "Oh, Miss Clara. My late sister's daughter. She assists the household." "She is not." One of the ladies gathered for today's introduction. The Earl's expression revealed nothing. "I see." He accepted the explanation without another question, yet his gaze drifted once more toward the rain-speckled windows. A distant memory stirred. Years earlier, while returning from the peninsula after the war, he had found a wounded lark trapped beneath a collapsed cart. Every officer had ridden past. Only his younger sister had stopped to save it. She had died 2 winters later of scarlet fever. Since then, he had rarely seen anyone pause for a creature too small to offer gratitude. The memory faded as quickly as it had come. Still, he found himself wondering why the quiet young woman had cared more for an injured Sparrow than for meeting one of the wealthiest earls in England. And for the first time since accepting the invitation to Ashcombe Manor, Lord Nathaniel Blackthorne realized he was no longer curious about the 4 ladies waiting to impress him. He was curious about the one who had not tried at all. Luncheon was announced a short while later, and with it came another carefully arranged opportunity for introductions. The long dining room of Ashcombe Manor had been transformed into a display of quiet extravagance. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above polished mahogany, while silver candelabras reflected soft afternoon light across porcelain imported from France. Freshly cut roses filled the room with a delicate fragrance that almost concealed the faint scent of burning oak drifting from the fireplace. Every place at the table had been chosen with purpose. Lord Harcourt had seated the Earl between Lady Beatrice and Lady Eleanor, believing proximity would encourage admiration. Lady Victoria sat directly opposite, where every graceful smile could be easily noticed. Miss Margaret Ellsworth, the youngest of the invited ladies, occupied the remaining place nearest the Earl. Only one chair remained empty. "It appears someone is missing," the Earl observed quietly before anyone had taken their seats. Lord Harcourt cleared his throat. "My niece rarely joins formal meals unless requested, your lordship." "I see." Nothing more was said. The guests settled into their places, and the servants began serving the first course. Conversation flowed exactly as Lord Harcourt had hoped. Lady Beatrice described the London season with practiced elegance. Lady Eleanor spoke confidently about art and literature. Miss Victoria entertained everyone with amusing stories from neighbouring estates. Margaret demonstrated her talent for the pianoforte by discussing composers she had studied in Vienna. Each conversation felt polished. Each answer sounded rehearsed. Nathaniel listened with flawless manners, yet each compliment seemed carefully aimed rather than honestly offered. He had attended enough noble gatherings to recognize performance when he heard it. As the second course arrived, an elderly butler leaned toward Lord Harcourt and whispered something into his ear. Lord Harcourt frowned. "The conservatory," he muttered. "Very well." The Earl noticed the exchange. "Is there a problem?" "Oh, nothing of consequence," Lord Harcourt replied quickly. "My niece has apparently turned the conservatory into a hospital once again." A few of the ladies laughed politely. Lady Beatrice smiled behind her wineglass. "Miss Clara has always collected unfortunate little creatures." Lady Eleanor added, "Last spring she delayed an entire picnic because she insisted a hedgehog deserved proper shelter before the rain." More laughter followed. "How very compassionate," Margaret said, though the amusement in her voice suggested otherwise. Nathaniel said nothing. Instead, he watched Lord Harcourt wave a dismissive hand. "She possesses a gentle heart." Sadly, gentleness rarely proves useful in society. The Earl's fingers paused against the stem of his glass. "Does it not?" The question was spoken so calmly that no one immediately realized its weight. Lord Harcourt hesitated. "I merely meant." Society often values accomplishments more highly. Nathaniel inclined his head slightly. Perhaps society occasionally values the wrong accomplishments. Silence settled over the table. Lady Beatrice quickly changed the subject. I do hope your lordship enjoys riding. I've heard Blackthorn Hall maintains magnificent stables. It does. You must show them to us someday. Nathaniel offered the same courteous smile he had worn all afternoon. If circumstances allow. His answers remained brief. His attention, however, had already wandered elsewhere. Through the tall dining room windows he noticed movement near the conservatory. A young woman emerged carrying a small wicker basket lined with soft linen. She paused beneath a beam of fading sunlight, carefully lifting the injured sparrow into her hands before examining its fragile wing. She smiled. Not because anyone watched her. Not because she expected praise. Simply because the tiny creature had accepted a few drops of water. The smile transformed her face. It was neither dazzling nor dramatic. It was peaceful. Real. Without thinking, Nathaniel rose from his chair. The scrape of wood against polished floor echoed through the dining room. Every conversation stopped. Lord Harcourt blinked in confusion. Your lordship. Nathaniel's gaze remained fixed upon the gardens beyond the glass. If you will excuse me for a moment. Without waiting for anyone to offer an explanation, the Earl walked toward the terrace doors, leaving 4 astonished ladies staring after him. None of them realized he was not walking away from a luncheon. He was walking toward the quiet woman no one believed worthy of his attention. The terrace doors closed softly behind the Earl, muting the hum of conversation inside the dining room. A crisp autumn breeze greeted him, carrying the scent of damp stone, rosemary, and fallen leaves. Somewhere beyond the orchard, a flock of crows lifted into the pale sky, their cries fading across the fields. Clara did not hear him approach. She had settled onto a weathered stone bench beside the conservatory, the wicker basket resting beside her. The injured sparrow perched uncertainly on her gloved hand, its tiny claws gripping the leather as though testing whether the world was still safe. It appears your patient has decided to trust you. His voice was calm, deep enough to startle without frightening. Clara looked up quickly. For the briefest moment, surprise crossed her face. She immediately rose and offered a respectful curtsy. My lord. Nathaniel noticed something different about her curtsy. It was neither overly graceful nor deliberately modest. It was simply sincere. You needn't interrupt your work on my account, he said. Clara glanced toward the sparrow. I was only making certain he could stand. The bird fluttered its wings weakly before settling once more. You know something about birds. Not as much as Mr. Wilkes, our gamekeeper. A faint smile touched her lips. I only know they heal more quickly when they feel safe. Nathaniel found himself watching the sparrow instead of speaking. I imagine the same could be said of people. Clara lowered her eyes. I believe so. Silence settled comfortably between them. It was not the strained silence of strangers searching for clever conversation. It was the peaceful silence of 2 people with no desire to impress one another. Nathaniel realized he had not experienced such silence in years. Inside the manor, every word seemed chosen for effect. Here, the wind spoke louder than either of them. You were expected at luncheon, he said at last. I was. You chose to remain here. The sparrow could not mend itself. There was no apology in her voice, only quiet certainty. Nathaniel studied her expression. Most people would have left it. Perhaps. You did not. She gently stroked one finger along the bird's uninjured wing. My mother used to tell me that kindness is easiest when someone important is watching. She paused. The difficult kindness is offered when no one notices. Nathaniel felt those words settle heavily within him. His younger sister had once said something remarkably similar after giving her winter cloak to a shivering stable boy. She, too, had never believed compassion required an audience. You miss her. The words escaped Clara almost as a question. Nathaniel looked at her, surprised. I beg your pardon. Someone. She hesitated, suddenly uncertain whether she had spoken out of turn. When you watched the sparrow earlier, you looked at him as though he reminded you of someone. For several heartbeats, the Earl said nothing. Very few people observed him closely enough to notice such things. Fewer still would have dared mention them. My sister, he answered quietly. She loved every wounded creature she found. A gentle sadness softened his usually reserved expression. She believed saving one small life still mattered, even if the world never noticed. Clara smiled faintly. She sounds like someone I would have liked. Nathaniel surprised himself by smiling in return. I believe she would have liked you as well. Neither noticed Mr. Hensley, the estate steward, crossing the upper terrace with a ledger tucked beneath his arm. Nor did they notice Lady Beatrice standing behind the dining room curtains, watching the quiet conversation unfold. Her pleasant smile slowly disappeared. She had spent the entire morning preparing to capture the Earl's attention. Instead, the man everyone sought to impress was smiling at the one woman who had never tried. Lady Beatrice's fingers tightened around the curtain. For the first time that afternoon, she realized Clara Ashford might become far more than an overlooked relation. She might become a rival. Lady Beatrice remained motionless behind the drawing-room curtains long after the Earl and Clara disappeared beyond the conservatory. The reflection in the glass revealed a face still perfectly composed, yet her eyes betrayed something far less graceful. Until that afternoon, every plan had unfolded exactly as expected. Lord Harcourt had all but promised that the Earl's visit centred upon the 4 invited ladies. Beauty, accomplishment, and family standing would naturally guide his choice. It was how such things had always been done. Yet the Earl had abandoned an elegant luncheon to speak with a woman who had not even been presented. Something had gone terribly wrong. Across the terrace, Nathaniel and Clara continued walking slowly through the gardens. The narrow path curved beside a lily pond before disappearing beneath an avenue of old chestnut trees whose leaves drifted lazily to the ground. Neither hurried to fill the silence. Nathaniel found it strangely comforting. "I've been told," he said at last, "that Ashcombe once held the finest gardens in Hampshire." Clara smiled gently. "They still could." "You sound certain." "I've watched Mr. Briggs, our head gardener, coax roses back to life that everyone else declared dead." She bent to brush a fallen leaf from a white chrysanthemum. "Most things fail because people stop believing they can recover." Nathaniel watched the careful way she handled the fragile bloom. "You speak as though flowers and people are much alike." "I think they are." She straightened. "Neither thrives where they are neglected." The words lingered between them. Nathaniel's thoughts drifted unexpectedly toward Blackthorn Hall. Its endless corridors echoed with silence. Its grand rooms remained closed for months at a time. Since his father's passing and his sister's death, the estate had become orderly, respectable, and painfully empty. He had spent years restoring buildings, improving farms, expanding forests. Yet he had never considered whether a house itself could become lonely. "You care deeply for this place," he observed. Clara looked toward Ashcombe Manor. The old stone house stood proudly against the grey sky, though cracks spidered quietly across parts of its western wall. "It gave me a home." She hesitated. "I only wish I could give something back." Nathaniel noticed the sadness hidden beneath the simple statement. "You feel indebted." "I owe my uncle more than I can ever repay." "You help manage the household." "I do." "You care for the tenants." "I try." "You've devoted your life to this estate." A faint smile touched her lips. "Some debts are measured differently." Before Nathaniel could reply, hurried footsteps approached along the gravel path. Mr. Hensley, the estate steward, stopped several paces away, bowing respectfully. "My lord, forgive the interruption." Nathaniel turned. "What is it?" "The tenants from Mill Cottage have arrived." A shadow crossed Clara's face. "The Carters." Mr. Hensley nodded gravely. "The youngest boy has taken ill. The physician refuses another visit until last month's bill is paid." Clara's expression changed instantly. Without another thought, she handed the wicker basket containing the recovering Sparrow to Mrs. Dalton, who had just emerged from the conservatory. "I must go." Nathaniel frowned. "The physician refuses to treat a sick child." Mr. Hensley lowered his eyes. "The family has nothing left to sell." Lord Harcourt's financial troubles had become impossible to hide. Clara had already begun walking quickly toward the servants' entrance before realizing she had forgotten herself. She turned back. "My lord, forgive me. The child needs help." Nathaniel studied her for a long moment. Not once had she asked whether the family deserved assistance. Not once had she wondered whether anyone would praise her. She simply went because someone was suffering. "I shall come with you," he said quietly. Clara blinked in surprise. "My lord, there is no need." "There is every need." He looked toward the distant tenant cottages beyond the estate walls. "If a family upon this land is being denied care because of unpaid debt." His voice hardened with quiet resolve. "Then I would very much like to understand why." Clara stared at him, uncertainty and hope mingling in her eyes. Neither of them noticed Lord Harcourt watching from an upstairs window. His face had turned pale. Because if the Earl discovered how desperate Ashcombe's finances truly were, the carefully crafted image of the Harcourt family might collapse before the day was over. The carriage road leading from Ashcombe Manor to Mill Cottage wound through fields stripped bare by autumn. Golden stalks of harvested wheat lay bundled beneath grey skies, while smoke rose lazily from distant chimneys where tenant families prepared for another cold evening. The beauty of the countryside concealed hardships that rarely reached the drawing rooms of great houses. Nathaniel walked beside Clara without ceremony. His polished boots collected mud with every step, yet he neither complained nor slowed his pace. He noticed Clara greeting nearly everyone they passed. An elderly shepherd tipped his cap. A young girl carrying a basket of apples smiled shyly. Even the blacksmith paused at his forge to wish her good afternoon. Each greeting was genuine. Not one carried the stiffness reserved for nobility. "You know everyone," Nathaniel observed. Clara smiled softly. "I've simply lived among them. They seem fond of you. They are kind enough to forgive my mistakes." Nathaniel said nothing, though the answer lingered in his thoughts. Respect earned without title was rarer than respect commanded by one. Mill Cottage stood at the edge of a narrow stream, its once white walls weathered by years of rain. Several roof tiles had slipped, leaving patches hastily covered with rough timber. A thin curl of smoke escaped the crooked chimney. Before Clara reached the door, it opened. Mrs. Carter appeared, her face drawn with exhaustion. "Miss Clara." Tears filled the woman's eyes at the sight of her. "I feared you wouldn't come." Clara took both of her hands. "How is Thomas?" "The fever grows worse. The physician still refuses to return." Nathaniel's expression hardened. Inside, the cottage was painfully modest. The fire burned low to conserve wood. A kettle simmered quietly over the hearth. In the corner, a boy no older than 8 lay beneath patched blankets, his breathing uneven. His older sister sat beside him, gently cooling his forehead with a damp cloth. Nathaniel removed his gloves. The room reminded him less of poverty than of dignity struggling against impossible circumstances. Nothing had been wasted. Nothing had been neglected. There had simply never been enough. Clara knelt beside the child. "Thomas." The boy opened tired eyes. "You've brought the sunshine," he whispered weakly. She laughed softly despite the worry in her face. "I fear I only brought cloudy skies today. But perhaps they'll clear." The little boy managed the faintest smile. Nathaniel watched the exchange in silence. There was no performance here. No audience. Only kindness. Mrs. Carter wiped her eyes. "We've sold nearly everything. My husband's tools. My mother's jewelry. Even our winter blankets." She lowered her voice. "The doctor says he cannot keep treating families who cannot pay." Nathaniel looked toward Mr. Hensley. "How much?" The steward hesitated. "My lord." "How much?" £23. The amount struck Nathaniel like an insult. For many noblemen, £23 disappeared during a single evening's entertainment. Here, it stood between a child and medical care. Without another word, Nathaniel reached into the inner pocket of his coat. He withdrew a leather purse and placed it quietly upon the small wooden table. "There is enough there to settle the physician's account." Mrs. Carter gasped. "My lord, we could never." "You owe me nothing." His voice remained calm. "You owe only your son every chance to recover." Tears rolled freely down the woman's cheeks. Before anyone could speak again, hurried hoofbeats echoed outside. Moments later, a groom from Ashcombe Manor appeared breathless in the doorway. He bowed deeply. "My lord." "What is it?" "The Duke of Ravensshire has arrived unexpectedly at the manor." Nathaniel frowned. "The Duke?" "He claims urgent business." The groom glanced nervously toward Clara before lowering his voice. And Lady Beatrice has informed Lord Harcourt that Miss Clara deliberately persuaded your lordship to leave the luncheon. Silence filled the cottage. Clara's face lost its colour. She understood immediately what such an accusation meant. In noble society, reputation could be destroyed long before truth had a chance to defend itself. Nathaniel slowly turned toward the open doorway. His eyes, moments ago filled with quiet compassion, now carried the cold resolve of a man who had just discovered someone was willing to destroy an innocent woman for the sake of ambition. Without raising his voice, he spoke only 4 words. "Prepare my horse immediately." Nathaniel's horse reached Ashcombe Manor just as dusk settled over the countryside. The last rays of sunlight clung to the upper windows of the old estate, while the first lanterns flickered to life beneath the stone archways. From outside, the manor appeared every bit the noble residence it had been for generations. Inside, however, calm had given way to unease. Word of the Earl's unexpected departure from luncheon had spread through the household like wildfire. Servants whispered in corridors. Footmen exchanged uncertain glances. Even the musicians hired for the evening recital had quietly packed away their instruments, sensing that the carefully arranged gathering had lost its purpose. In the drawing room, Lord Harcourt paced before the fireplace, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. Lady Beatrice sat elegantly upon the velvet sofa, though satisfaction lingered behind her composed smile. "I only told your uncle what everyone witnessed," she said smoothly. "The Earl abandoned luncheon because Miss Clara encouraged his attention. It was inappropriate." Lady Eleanor shifted uneasily. "We never actually saw Clara encourage anything." Beatrice's smile remained unchanged. Perception matters far more than truth. Before anyone could answer, the drawing-room doors opened. A footman announced firmly, "The Earl of Blackthorn." Every conversation stopped. Nathaniel entered without haste, his expression calm enough to unsettle the room more than visible anger ever could. Lord Harcourt hurried forward. "My lord, I deeply regret this unfortunate misunderstanding." Nathaniel removed his gloves with deliberate care. "Do you?" The simple question drained the colour from Lord Harcourt's face. Lady Beatrice rose gracefully. "I fear Miss Clara has unintentionally created gossip. I merely wished to protect your lordship's reputation." Nathaniel turned toward her. His grey eyes were steady. "And you believe false accusations accomplish that?" The room fell silent. Beatrice hesitated for the first time that day. "I only reported what appeared obvious." Nathaniel took one measured step closer. "What appeared obvious?" "That she deliberately sought your attention." A faint smile crossed Nathaniel's face. It held no warmth. "Miss Ashford never once approached me." Beatrice blinked. "I approached her." The words landed like stones in still water. "I left the luncheon. I sought her conversation. I chose to accompany her to Mill Cottage. Every decision was mine." No one spoke. Nathaniel continued quietly. "If blame is to be assigned." His gaze swept across the room. "Assign it to the man who made those choices." Beatrice's confidence faltered. She searched for support, but even Lord Harcourt avoided her eyes. Nathaniel looked toward the older gentleman. "On my way back, I visited one of your tenant families." Lord Harcourt stiffened. "The Carters." Silence answered him. "Their son lies dangerously ill." The physician refused treatment over a debt so small it would scarcely purchase wine for a single London banquet. Lord Harcourt swallowed. "Our finances have become difficult." "I am aware." Nathaniel's voice remained composed. "What concerns me is not poverty. Fortunes rise and fall. What concerns me," he paused, "is allowing honourable people to suffer while appearances are preserved." The words struck deeper than any public insult. For several moments, only the crackling fireplace disturbed the silence. Finally, Nathaniel turned toward the doorway. "Miss Ashford." Everyone looked around in surprise. Clara stood quietly beside Mrs. Dalton, having returned only moments earlier. She had heard the final exchange but remained uncertain why she had been summoned. Nathaniel faced her. "Would you walk with me?" Confused whispers spread through the room. Clara glanced toward her uncle. Lord Harcourt gave a reluctant nod. Together they stepped onto the moonlit terrace, leaving the drawing-room behind. The evening air carried the scent of rain and fallen leaves. For several moments neither spoke. Then Nathaniel stopped beneath the old oak where they had first seen one another. I have spent years believing that character could be measured through reputation. He looked toward the dark branches overhead. Today I discovered I was mistaken. Clara searched his face, uncertain what he meant. Nathaniel reached into the pocket of his coat. From it, he withdrew a folded letter bearing the black wax seal of Blackthorn Hall. He held it carefully between his fingers. "There is something I wish to ask you." Before Clara could answer, the manor doors burst open behind them. A breathless servant hurried across the terrace. "My lord, the Duke of Ravensshire insists upon seeing you immediately." Nathaniel frowned. What business brings him here at this hour? The servant lowered his voice. "He claims it concerns your future marriage." Clara felt her heart sink. The unopened letter remained in Nathaniel's hand. Whatever he had intended to say would now have to wait. The servant's words hung in the cold night air. "The Duke of Ravensshire insists upon seeing you immediately." Nathaniel folded the sealed letter without breaking his gaze from Clara. "I shall return," he said quietly. There was neither promise nor uncertainty in his voice, only calm conviction. Clara inclined her head. "I understand, my lord." Yet as he disappeared back toward the manor, she found herself wondering whether the moment had slipped away forever. The Duke of Ravensshire was waiting in Lord Harcourt's study. Richard Ashford, Duke of Ravensshire, was nearly 60, broad-shouldered despite his age, with silver hair and piercing blue eyes that had unsettled younger noblemen for decades. His reputation rested not only upon his immense estates but upon his ability to judge character with uncomfortable accuracy. He remained standing as Nathaniel entered. "I apologize for arriving without notice," the Duke said. "You rarely apologize." "True." Nathaniel closed the study door. "What is so urgent?" The older man studied him for a long moment. "Your mother received another proposal today." Nathaniel sighed quietly. "I suspected as much." "Lady Arabella Worthington." Nathaniel's expression remained unchanged. "And?" "Your mother expects an engagement before Christmas." Nathaniel walked toward the fire. "I have already declined." "So I gathered." The Duke smiled faintly. "Which is why I came myself." Nathaniel looked up. "You once told me something after your father's funeral." "I've forgotten many things." "I have not." The Duke's voice softened. "You said you would marry only the woman who made Blackthorn Hall feel like a home again." Silence settled over the room. "I did." "Have you found her?" Nathaniel answered almost immediately. "Yes." The Duke raised an eyebrow. "And does she know?" "Not yet." A knowing smile crossed the older man's face. "Then stop allowing society to make decisions that belong to your heart." Elsewhere in the manor, Clara packed quietly. Mrs. Dalton stood beside the bed, watching with growing concern. "You cannot be serious." Clara folded another simple dress into her travelling case. "I cannot remain." "Because of Lady Beatrice." "Because gossip has already begun." She closed the case gently. "If I stay, every whisper against the Earl becomes another burden upon him." Mrs. Dalton's eyes filled with sadness. "You've spent your whole life leaving quietly so others remain comfortable." Clara managed a small smile. "It has always seemed easier." "For whom?" Clara had no answer. A soft knock interrupted them. Lord Harcourt entered. For the first time that evening, the proud gentleman looked every one of his years. "I've been unfair to you." The words came awkwardly. "I saw only duty." "I never saw everything you quietly carried for this family." Clara looked at him in surprise. He removed a small iron key from his pocket. "Your mother planted a rose garden behind the old chapel." "I locked it after she died." "I could never bear to look at it." He placed the key in Clara's hand. "It belongs to you." Emotion caught briefly in Clara's throat. "Thank you, Uncle." It was the first time she had called him that in years. Before dawn broke, a single carriage waited at the front entrance. Clara climbed the steps quietly. No servants gathered. No farewells were announced. She preferred it that way. As the driver reached for the reins, "Stop." Nathaniel's voice echoed across the courtyard. Everyone turned. He crossed the gravel with purposeful strides, the folded letter still in his hand. He stopped beside the carriage. "I believe," he said, looking directly into Clara's eyes, "you intended to leave without allowing me to finish what I came to say." Clara's fingers tightened around the carriage door. The first rays of sunrise broke across the estate. Nathaniel slowly unfolded the sealed letter. This time, he intended to let every word be heard. Nathaniel stood beside the carriage as dawn slowly awakened Ashcombe Manor. The morning mist drifted across the gravel drive, wrapping the ancient estate in a veil of silver. Somewhere in the distance, church bells announced the beginning of a new day, their soft echoes carrying across the quiet countryside. The folded letter remained in his hand. Clara rested one gloved hand upon the carriage door. "I never intended to leave without gratitude," she said softly. "I only wished to leave before becoming another burden." Nathaniel looked at her steadily. "You have mistaken yourself for a burden from the very beginning." She lowered her eyes. It seemed the sensible thing to believe. It was never the truthful thing. For a long moment, neither spoke. The servant standing nearby quietly withdrew into the house, leaving the courtyard empty. Nathaniel unfolded the letter. Its black wax seal had already been broken. "This," he said, "was written yesterday evening. I intended to give it to you beneath the old oak before we were interrupted." Clara looked at the parchment but made no move to accept it. "I would rather hear your own words." A faint smile touched his face. "So would I." He folded the letter once more and slipped it back into his coat. "When I accepted Lord Harcourt's invitation, I expected another carefully arranged introduction. I believed I would meet accomplished ladies. I believed I would hear polished conversations. I believed I would eventually choose the woman best suited to become Countess of Blackthorn." He paused. "I was wrong." Clara remained silent. "The first person who truly captured my attention never tried to. You weren't waiting to impress me. You weren't seeking admiration. You were trying to save a frightened Sparrow." His voice remained calm. "But that was not why I noticed you. I noticed you because kindness came naturally to you. You cared for servants without expecting thanks. You remembered tenants by name. You crossed muddy fields to comfort a sick child. You never performed goodness. You simply lived it." Clara's eyes shimmered with quiet emotion. "No one has ever described me that way." Then no one was paying attention. Nathaniel took one step closer. "My father once told me that a great house is not held together by stone. It is held together by the character of those who live within it. I spent years repairing Blackthorn Hall. I restored its fields. I rebuilt its farms. But I never made it feel alive." His expression softened. "I believe you could." Clara searched his face. "My lord." "Nathaniel." He smiled gently. "If you are to answer what I am about to ask, I would rather you knew my name." The morning breeze stirred the fallen leaves around their feet. Nathaniel slowly extended his hand. "Clara Ashford. I cannot promise a life filled with grand balls. I cannot promise London seasons. My estate is quiet. The winters are long. The responsibilities are many. But I can promise honesty, respect, and a home where your kindness will never again be mistaken for weakness." His voice grew quieter. "Will you become my countess?" For several heartbeats, Clara could not answer. She thought of the frightened girl who had arrived at Ashcombe after losing her parents, the young woman who had spent years believing she should remain unnoticed, the countless small acts of kindness no one had considered important. And then she looked at the man before her. He had seen every one of them, not because they were extraordinary, but because he had taken the time to notice. A tear escaped despite her smile. "I will." Nathaniel gently took her hand. No applause greeted them. No orchestra played. Only the first rays of sunlight broke through the clouds, bathing the old manor in warm gold. It was enough. The months that followed brought quiet changes to Ashcombe. Nathaniel settled every outstanding debt owed by the Carter family and established a permanent fund ensuring that no tenant would again be denied medical care for lack of money. Lord Harcourt, humbled by the events of that autumn, devoted himself to restoring the neglected cottages before repairing the grand rooms of the manor. For the first time in many years, he walked the estate not as a man protecting appearances, but as one earning forgiveness. Lady Beatrice returned to London, where society soon found another fashionable story to discuss. Time, as it always did, carried gossip away far more quickly than truth. Mrs. Dalton often smiled whenever letters arrived from Blackthorn Hall. Each one contained stories of flourishing gardens, healthy tenants, warm fires, and a small birdhouse standing beneath the largest oak on the estate. Clara had insisted it remain there. Every spring, sparrows returned to nest inside it. Nathaniel liked to think they remembered. Perhaps they did. Or perhaps they simply recognized what every weary heart longs to find. A place where kindness is quietly welcomed, where gentle souls are finally seen, and where love begins, not with the loudest voice in the room, but with the quiet heart that never stopped caring.